I'm Ralph Meyer from the Delegation and Organizational Procedures Branch in Oklahoma City.
And I'm Kevin Kendall, also in the Delegation and Organizational Procedures Branch in Oklahoma City. And we're here today to discuss FAA participation in ODA projects for the purpose of oversight.
Yeah, and I think first thing we want to cover, Kevin, is that there's some relevant regulations that apply to ODA holders when the FAA needs to perform oversight or supervision. That's specifically covered in Part 183 of the regulations. It says that an ODA holder has to coordinate with the FAA during its supervision and oversight of an ODA holder. So there's also some relevant information in Order 8100.15 that applies to any kind of supervision or oversight activities with respect to how we communicate and interact with the ODA unit.
Okay, so there's plenty of guidance that might not always be applied the way it was intended. So it sounds like this would be a good thing to have a discussion on.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of nuances here that we can't really address specifically in policy, but we can kind of flesh out what our intent with the policy is and how we want it to be applied in the field.
Okay, so I know, one place where the place where this really enters into play is when we talk about ODAs that do projects, and those projects have program notification letters, and the OMT is required to coordinate the program notification letter and provide comments and response back to the ODA holder. Several of the things that we would expect to see in that is we would identify any mandatory participation, things where only the FAA could do it. So if there was an issue that needed resolution or equivalent safety finding established, those kind of things that only the FAA can do, we would identify them to them that we needed to do that. There's also provisions for discretionary participation, but that's for the purpose of reserving the function to be performed ourselves. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. In terms of the order, this all falls under the heading of project participation,
okay,
which could be mandatory or discretionary reasons, as you talked about. One of the specific reasons that's called out in the order is participation for the purposes of oversight.
Okay, and that's the one that we think needs some specific clarification. Yeah. All right, great.
And so that can be very similar, though, to just general oversight that we might do of the ODA holder.
Okay.
So, I mean, we might just decide to go out and do a supervision visit, coordinate a visit to their facility that's not related to a particular project, but we might be doing the same sorts of activities.
Okay. And when we talk about that, we're looking at we're doing oversight of the ODA, the authority that the organization holds, and we're doing it generally as a system. So although we might be looking at the work of a particular unit member performing a function, we're doing it in the context of that activity as part of the ODA authorization that we gave to a holder, and any guidance or feedback should be made in that context as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If we identify any issues or problems, we want to coordinate those through the ODA administrators. Our job's not to provide guidance or instruction to the individual unit members, but to make sure that the organization is functioning appropriately.
Okay, so how do I know what the appropriate way to do that is? At what point, when I'm observing the work of a unit member and I feel like it's necessary to communicate back, if all communication is supposed to go through the administrator, does that mean I'm not allowed to talk to the ODA unit member that I'm observing?
Certainly you're allowed to talk to them. You wouldn't want to mandate corrective action to them. That sort of thing should always be done through an administrator.
Okay, or give them specific guidance of how they have to do something.
Sure, we can always give them guidance and tips on how we think things should be done, but as far as, again, mandating any specific thing, we'd want to, and if there's a safety issue or something that we think we need an administrator's attention to, we could, always request that, we get them on the spot there as we need them.
Okay. What if I observe the unit member doing something that might be different than how I would expect an individual to do it, or how I might do it as an ASE or an ASI? is it important for me to know what their procedures manual calls for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think especially when it comes to these communications on site and how we interact with the ODA unit, that sort of thing should be kind of established and defined in their ODA unit manual.
Okay, so especially if I'm going to observe a unit member performing a function, I should know for that ODA what the expectation is for communication between the OMT and the ODA holder, what's appropriate to be done at the administrator level, what might be okay to do from an OMT member directly with the ODA unit member.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, things could vary based upon the size and administration of the organization and, you know, what kind of resources they have. So, whereas with a larger organization, we might work more specifically with the ODA administrators. For smaller organizations, it might be understood that we give more guidance and instruction to the individual unit.
Okay, and it's important to know what that dynamic is, what's called for in that communication.
And that's the one area in an ODA procedures manual where it really sets expectations for the FAA.
Okay.
And how we should work with the ODA holder.
All right. So we talked about some specific instances where an OMT member might actually go to a facility or go to a location and observe a unit member performing a function. But that's not the only types of activities that might exist for project participation for the purpose of oversight, is
Yeah,
it?
we really cover two aspects in the manual. One is, again, to assess performance, and another reason we might be participating is to gain knowledge of the project or the product.
Okay, all right. So there may be numerous reasons that the FAA project team or OMT might benefit or actually need an understanding of the product's design, how it functions, how it's going to be manufactured, any number of things. So if there is a need for that, then identifying project participation for the purpose of oversight is a place that we can do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. And does it always contemplate that the OMT member, the FAA person, is going to go to the facility or go to a location and observe something?
No, it could be activity that the OMT member does a desk review of some substantiation data.
All right.
And they request the ODA holder to submit that, in their response to the P&L.
Okay. All right.
But I think, there's one important difference when it comes to project participation for this oversight aspects is that that participation isn't really necessary in order for the ODA holder to go ahead and complete the project.
Okay, so unlike the other two types, the mandatory participation and the discretionary, we're actually going to perform the function, this is kind of on a non-impact basis to the project. So if the activity occurs and they notify us that the activity is going to occur, it's up to us whether we show up and have that project participation. If we don't show up, it doesn't mean they can't do the activity and move on with the project.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's not our intention to try to impact their schedule or the project by doing this kind of oversight. I guess the one exception to that is if we identify something that we know would be a non-compliance or that could result in a non-compliance, we'd have to take some kind of action to make sure that was resolved before the approval was issued.
Okay, and what would that action be?
Again, I think we'd have to raise whatever condition we witnessed or identified with the ODA administrators and tell them there's something that they
Okay, so it might depend. It likely would be something that you document on a supervision record in many cases if you actually went to the facility for the purpose of oversight?
Yeah, absolutely. Any kind of supervision visit to a facility needs to be documented. I guess there's some uncertainty now with respect to us now having core and supporting OMT members, whether or not that has to be done on a supervision record.
Okay.
But certainly core OMT members would have to fill out a supervision record. Supporting OMT members would at least have to record and document that.
Right, so
whatever
and communicate that back to the core OMT member.
Absolutely.
But in any event, if it was something significant that needed to be corrected in order for the project to be completed successfully, we would expect and request corrective action from the ODA holder.
For sure.
Yep. All right. Are there any other specific guidelines when participating for the purpose of oversight?
No, I just think we need to keep in mind that, you know, our oversight activities is not there to make sure that we comply on that project or the ODA holder achieves compliance on the project. It's to somehow assess performance of the organization.
All right. So it's not a quality assurance or a compliance assurance function on behalf of the FAA. It's an assessment of how the designee, the ODA in this case, is performing on our behalf.
Yeah, I think we should have some specific activities the ODA holders performing that, you know, we want to take a look at and see how they're doing those things.
Okay. Are there any guidelines on how much of this we should or can do?
No, I mean, certainly we can do as much as we want, being the authority. I mean, I think we want to be cognizant of the ODA holder and make our impact on their project work as little as we can, but certainly we have to do enough to assess performance, and that's something
Right.
that
So
comes
we have,
out of our supervision planning every
right.
year.
We have specific needs that we have to fulfill in doing supervision, and if some of that needs to be done as part of participation during projects, then yeah, we have a need to do that, and we can do as much of that as takes to satisfy that need.
Yep. And certainly I think flight test is an area where there's a lot of this kind of activity, especially probably for product familiarity reasons.
Okay.
So I guess that brings up the question as to what the FAA's role is while they're doing that sort of oversight. Would we expect an ODA or an OMT flight test pilot to operate the aircraft while they're doing this participatory oversight?
And so I think that's a tough question to know when that would be appropriate or not. I think there might be the need for the pilot to be familiar with the operation of the airplane. That part itself might not be participatory oversight. It might just be participation or some other, or could even be done under at some other time for the purpose of familiarization or occurrency. With respect to oversight, I think it would only be appropriate for pilots to control the airplane if it was necessary for them to do that so that they could evaluate the performance of the ODA holders of flight test pilot in performing a delegated function.
So if they witness the ODA holder's flight test pilot make an assessment of control forces or something of subjective that's being assessed during a particular test point, the OMT member might want to refly that to make sure they come to the same kind of conclusion.
Right. I think that would be a great example of if a flight test pilot felt like that was necessary, they should coordinate that up front so that the test crew would know that was an expectation, maybe even provide for it to occur at some point during the test plan for the flight test pilot doing oversight to evaluate the performance of the unit member flight test pilot.
Yep. Okay. Man, I think we've covered most of the highlights, most of the issues I'm aware of.
Okay, so I mean, we certainly have established that project participation for the purpose of oversight is appropriate. It's appropriate when the FAA determines there's a need for it. The thing that's unique about it is it doesn't have to happen, even though we've identified it. It shouldn't hold up the ODA holders' schedule or activity as long as they coordinate with us and let us know that that activity will occur, and whether we can come and participate in it or not is our decision. If we don't, the ODA holder can move on and continue that activity in our absence.
Yeah, and if we are doing oversight at the organization facility, we should make sure we have a supervision record or other
Appropriately document that,
documentation
okay.
of what we found during that assessment.
All right, yeah, I think that's a very helpful discussion on what we mean by participatory oversight or oversight for participation purposes.
Yeah. So if you have additional questions, be sure and submit them through the designee landing page, and we'll make sure Kevin gets a chance to answer them.
Be glad to do that.